All right, to get your model from Blender into Unity, well, what you're going to need to do is have it fully textured so it's ready to go. And this one's obviously not, but the parts that I've got done are fine. If I just switch to my UV editor, you can see down here that I've only got one material. Now it's going to bring a few more materials across. Sometimes it brings across a few. It's not a big deal, but in this case, I think it will just bring across the one when I import it. If it brings across more, that's fine. What you will need to know is, one, where your texture is located on the hard drive, and that's pretty much it. So in Unity, I'm going to go into Unity and set up a new project. So in here, I'm going to call it Flat Shaded Castle. And take note of where it is. Users, public, documents, Unity projects. Take note of that. You can click that to set up a proper a folder for it if you're not sure how to get to there. And you'll probably want to click Asset Packages and click Effects. Also, if you're using the built-in Unity trees, you'll want to click Environment. So I'm going to click Done. And then I'm going to create project. I'll just leave that to create. Now going back to Blender, I'll switch back to my 3D view. And what I'm going to want to do is save this model and any other models that you've got as well. Save as, and save it into that Unity folder. So if I go all the way back to C, Users, Public, Documents, Unity projects, and then I called it Flat Shaded Castle, Assets folder, make a new folder in here called Blender Models. So it has to go into that Assets folder. You can't just chuck it in the basic thing. Blender Models, and then save it in there. Okay, so that's saved into there. If I now go and load up Unity, it should have loaded. I'm not sure where it's gone. Load that project. Oh, here we go. I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, it's just importing those assets there. So it won't take too long. Okay. So in here, it's imported, these are the assets that I've got. This is our assets folder, Blender Models, and there's my castle. Now, the import settings that you'll want to set on the right-hand side, you will want to generate colliders. You'll want to generate light map UVs. You'll want to turn normals to calculate, and you'll want to turn the smoothing angle all the way down, especially if you're using the flat shaded textures. If you're not, you can leave it where it is, but if you're going to use flat shading, you'll want to turn that smoothing angle all the way down. Click apply. That might take a little bit of time. Now while that's happening, I'm going to go into here and create a new model in here. And some people were asking, how do I create a terrain in Blender? It's really simple. Add a mesh, a plane, scale it up a whole lot. Tab into edit mode, subdivide it a lot, and it's up to you how many times. And then you want to go into sculpt mode and sculpt this. Okay, you can turn that radius up quite a bit to work with the terrain. You probably want to make sure that you could actually do this with your model so that you've got an area that is flat. So this bit here, maybe if I do this, it should kind of all level it out. So I've got an area I can put my castle at. There might be an area flatten. Okay, so that'll flatten it to that area there. Make it all the same height. So I can put my castle on that bit. I could make it a little bit more bumpy, just give it some character there. Okay, and play around with all these bits. And then turn the radius down, of course, and get in there in a bit more detail. The blob one's quite cool. Don't know what this does. Okay, so there I've got a pretty hideous looking texture. From here, I would go File, Save As, and I'm going to save it into that same thing. I'm going to call it terrain.blend. I don't need any materials on it. I'll save it into there. Okay, so going back to Unity, that'll now import my terrain texture as well, terrain model. And I'll want to go and change that to Calculate, Generate Lightmap UVs, Generate Colliders, turn that angle all the way down, apply that. And I'll just have to wait a bit of time for that to apply. You will need to do this at home. The school computers don't work. If you don't have a computer that's capable of running Unity, you'll need to arrange a time to use my school desktop. And obviously, if you're not one of my students, none of this will mean anything to you. But if you are, then you will need to arrange a time to use my school desktop, and it should be even faster than this computer. And this shouldn't take too long. It's just because of the amount of subdivision on this model here, and the light map UVs is going to take a while. Probably don't need those because I'm not actually going to bake any lighting onto it. It's probably the normals that are taking time to calculate. So anyway, going back into here, let's just check that everything looks fine. Like, that looks pretty horrible as a terrain. I'd want to make sure that I take a bit more time to do things like you know, add some paths or something. And if I was going to manually add paths on here, I'd probably want to use a UV map as well with some separate colors. You'll see in a minute that I'm going to put a UV map, not a UV, a material on it, but that material is just going to have a solid color. So I can play around with that. I'm just mucking about while I wait for this thing to load. Took a while last night when I did it, and it's going to take a while today. But even just randomly going over it with a brush like that, it starts to make it look a lot more realistic in terms of terrain. And then you can start to scale things. So if I scale, go into object mode, scale along the Z-axis, you know, you can lower things down or make them really, really pronounced. And you can scale the whole thing up and down as well, of course. So anyway, going back to here, still not done. Let's see what's taken so long. It is this bit here. I'm just going to pause the video while it does that. All right, so I had to force quit Unity and turn that off, and then it worked. So you don't want to generate light map UVs on something with this many vertices on it. It's just going to take forever. So anyway, I've got that in there. So let's go about creating this scene. So first of all, I'm going to drag my terrain in. It's going to be pretty tiny, so I'm probably going to need to scale this up a whole lot. And I might actually delete this one. Delete that. And go into Blender. And I might export this one. So I'll just save this one into there. It should go in here. And so that's in there now. So that's a bit better. And I'll scale this one up. So in Unity, R is scale. And I'm going to grab that middle bit and scale it quite a bit. And then I'm going to drag my castle in. As you can see, I'm just going to use V. W will take me back to there. V, grab that bottom right vertice and find somewhere on here where it's going to be fairly suitable. I'm not really worried too much about where it goes actually. There. F will zoom to it. Okay, so there's my castle. I'll just bring it up and kind of position it in the right place. This is why getting it right in Blender is better, because you can't edit this in here. So I'm just going to jam it there, and who cares. So now these are all completely untextured. They are in here, so that's good. So I'm going to go to Materials folder, and here's some materials that have been imported along with my models. These three must have come in with that, because I definitely didn't create a model for that. Doesn't matter which ones these are. What we're going to do is provided in Blender that you named your materials, then this shouldn't be a problem. See, this is called flat shaded texture map. This is none flat shaded texture map. Don't know what that is, and unnamed. But most of them should come in named, the same things that you named them in Blender. So what I need to do is find where I imported, where I saved my texture. So I do know where I saved it, so I just have to find it now. Okay, so in this folder here, I've got my flat shaded texture map. Doesn't matter what the folder is as long as you know where it is, and I'm just going to drag that into here. Okay, it'll bring this in. I click on the flat shaded one and drag this up to the albedo, and I'll just do it to the others as well. Okay. Oh, that was the unnamed one, so I probably didn't want to put that on there. Instead, what I want to do with this one is get rid of that from there and change this color to the color I want the landscape to be. Okay, there's nothing stopping you having multiple parts to that, so you could have you could make the texture and then make a road going through it or whatever, or go into Blender and texture these parts here as a road. More subdivisions would be better in that case because you'd be able to get a little bit more detail in there. So I'm just going to leave it like that. Of course, you'd want to put in things like trees and stuff like that. Now, I'm going to put in trees in a normal Unity terrain in a minute, but I just want to demonstrate how to set this scene up. So at the moment, the camera's set some weird place, and this is a problem I just noticed. This material here, unnamed, is also used for this stuff here, which I haven't textured. So that's why that's gone green as well. So you need to make sure that you do name all your materials, or else you can get errors like that, because unnamed is used for both this and that there. Anyway, looking at this here, I might decide, okay, this is where I want my camera to start. I'm going to go game object or assets. So game object, click on main camera, align with view. Okay, it'll change the camera to there. Now on my main camera, I'm going to add component, image effects, rendering, not rendering, camera, depth of field. If I switch to game mode, you'll see what that does. You can play around with some of these settings here. You probably want to increase the focal distance a bit. And then add component, image effects, bloom and glow. This is up to you whether you want to add this. You can play around with the intensity of the bloom. This is not essential. You probably want to put anti-aliasing on. It doesn't really matter in this case. The main one is the camera depth of field. And also the camera vignette just adds a nice little effect around the outside. You can play with that a little bit. Bring it in. And there's a few others on here. Image effects. You don't want to use those displacement ones. Noise, you can add a film grain to it. It can look quite good. And then lastly, color adjustments. This depends on what you're after. If you're doing an Old West, a sepia tone one can be used effectively. In this case, I think it doesn't work, so I'm just going to turn it off. But image effects, color adjustments, color correction, and you can play around with some of this stuff here, like for example turning the saturation down, playing around with the amount of red, blue and green, and you can click on those curves and change them up here. Oops, it doesn't seem to want to let me. Okay, until you get something that like that looks a bit more Old West there. So playing around with those settings until you get something that suits the theme of the map a little bit more. Lastly, you'll probably want to explore your map. Well, actually, you do need to set this in there. So you're going to have to actually assets, import package, characters, and it will decompress this package. Just import the whole thing. It might take a minute or two to decompress. And here's where you're going to be able to test whether or not your thing is to scale. You do need to do this. Now, you don't need to have a character that moves around, but this is just one easy way of doing it. So I put characters in, first person character, prefab, and I'll just chuck in the first person controller. You need to be in scene mode to do that. First person controller, hit F, and make sure before you do anything that this has got generate colliders turned on, and so does your castle. If you don't have generate colliders turned on, then you will be just able to fall through the map. And then you can click play, and if everything goes well, you'll be able to walk around and test it. Now, what I can tell immediately is this archway here is actually meant to be really, really big. So this castle is way too small. I'm going to have to scale it up. So hit G, sorry, not G, R in Unity, and scale it up. Probably want to scale it up maybe 3 times. So 3, 3, 3. And just to check where my character controller is, I can move that into the middle. Maybe I'll move this up a little bit so I can see the staircase and get an idea of what it's meant to be like. Okay, so that's more the size of the archway. If I just walk over here, I probably won't be able to walk up the stairs, that's not a problem. But that door's a pretty decent looking size. Okay, so check the scale there. I can walk around in here. I've got those image effects happening, real-time shadows, it all looks pretty nice. I know that this doesn't look right, but that's because I didn't prepare the terrain specifically for this. It's also pretty shiny up top there. That's not a problem. Okay, so that's using that terrain. Very quickly, if I delete this, game object, 3D object, terrain, it'll bring in a really big terrain. You'll want to change some of these settings. First of all, you'll probably want to change the position of it. So that the Y is at the 0. I don't want to change that. That means you'll want to make sure your castle is, or whatever it is at 0. That'll make it touching. And then move that. Let's position it so that's underneath it. Okay, so that's on the ground now. This here will raise the terrain. It's not raising it very much. I'll make sure I turn that up. Okay, raise the terrain. And there's different brushes you can use to get different effects, so it doesn't look as, I guess, computer generated. It looks a bit rougher. Some of them that just look like that looks really computer generated over the top. This one here will set the size. So if I click there, shift click here. If I shift click there and then click everything else, it'll set it to that size. So you can make plateaus, good for making Western stuff. This one will smooth it out. So I can smooth things out. This one here will allow you to paint the terrain. You need to click edit textures, add texture, select texture. I know I'm going pretty quick, but there's hundreds of tutorials out there on this. And then select the texture that you want. There's loads more on the Unity Asset Store, and any texture you import from wherever must be a multiple of 2. So when I say a multiple of 2, not just divisible by 2, but a multiple of 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32, etc. So you're normally looking at textures 256 by 256, 1024 by 1024, etc. So there's one texture. If I add another texture, I don't know where they've all gone. Grass and rock. Add, I can now paint with that second texture. So I can click that and paint with that. And then if I was to add a third texture, I can click on that third texture and paint with that. Like that. Okay, this one here, we'll add trees, edit trees, add tree. And I'll use this conifer, add, and it allows me to add trees. So I can click. Now it's lagging because it's also recording the screen at the same time. Should have added more trees than that. It should add a whole bunch of trees in a sec. And you can also go at the top here, there used to be a button. Oh, mass place trees, there it is. I don't want to place 10,000 trees, but I will place 30 trees and place them. Okay, so it places 30 trees. And do the same thing again. Maybe place 300 trees. Place 300 trees. It's going to take a little bit of time. 300 trees. There is, as far as I know, I don't think there's a way to remove mass placed trees. Oh no, you can shift click. And that will let you remove trees if they're in the wrong place. So you can mass place trees, and shadows will go on them, but you'll only see those shadows when you're up close. I don't know why I've gone all the way over there. Okay. Lastly, you've got foliage. I'm just going to zoom in. This stuff here has the potential to look really garbage. Add a grass texture. Pick a grassy texture. There's a bunch in here. There's one. You probably want to set these to white and grey, not green, and then you can paint with it. So I click add and paint. Now I've got this set up so it's very, very, very sparse. The default is something like this, and it looks ridiculous. So just be careful with that. You want to turn that right down, like really, really low, and then just be sparse with it. The more sparse you are, the better it's going to look. Okay, so if I just go all the way over to my castle and paint some of these outside. Where's my first person controller? There. I'll just run it and you'll see. I'm not sure what those lines are there that are showing up. Oh, it's because it's not quite on the ground. I think I might have changed the thing, and stuff's not quite joining. That's why shadows are going through it. But it's a little bit weird. It's stuff like that you're not going to get marked down on. Okay, so you can see that grass. There's not going to be shadows for the grass, so be aware of that. You'll want to probably add some detail mesh as well. But I'll go back to this terrain. Lastly, the terrain settings, which I should have gone through at the start. You can play around with all of these. How long to true view distance, how far until they billboard, which means it just replaces them with a flat thing instead of a model. Size of the terrain down here, resolution of the terrain, etc. So theoretically, you could actually set the terrain resolution quite low and do flat shading in here, and you could experiment with that as well. I'm pretty sure that is all there is to the Unity part. A lot of other stuff, if you want to play around with the settings in here, that's up to you. Of course, this style here is going to look a lot better if you've got a realistic textured model. The other style will look better if you've got the flat shaded model like this one.